Beefing up the military. While China ramps up its attack, Taiwan ramps up its defense. Merci beaucoup. President Tsai awards the French delegation for their support for Taiwan. Tortured in China, we look into the secret detention regime. And from sorrow to hope, 2 Taiwanese girls received kidney transplants and a new start in life. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. For the first time since September 21st, Taiwan has gone a day without Chinese incursions into its air defense zone. But for Taipei, the recent escalation of intimidation from Beijing confirms the need to boost the strength of its domestic defense. William Yan has more.
Last month, Taiwan's president oversaw the commissioning of a new domestically built warship. The ship is part of the country's plan to boost indigenous defense capability amid heightened tensions with China. The corvette, the Tajiang, has been nicknamed a carrier killer. It is designed to have air defense capabilities and can carry anti-ship missiles. It is the lead ship in its class, the first of 6 ordered by the Navy. And now a second warship is on the way. The construction of the next Duojiang-class corvette began in Yilan County this week. The Navy hopes to have all 6 vessels in service by the end of 2023. On the same day, Taiwan's defense minister publicly confirmed for the first time the existence of the Yunfeng medium-range surface-to-surface missile, which has been in development since the 1990s, but was unwilling to reveal details.
部长，云峰飞弹是不是有1200公里的实力？
我派
有没有？
私下跟委员报告，这出
现在研发成功了没？
我们是在努力啊，一直在努力。
还在努力。
The move to boost Taiwan's domestic defense industry comes amid rising military tension across the strait. China flew 56 planes into Taiwan's southwestern air defense zone on Monday, setting a new record for the 3rd day in succession. There were more than 150 incursions by PLA warplanes in the first 5 days of October. The sorties prompted the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to call China's actions provocative.
With regard to Taiwan, I have to tell you and reiterate that we are very concerned by the PRC's provocative military activity near Taiwan. As we've said, the activity is destabilizing, it risks miscalculation, and it has the potential to undermine regional peace and stability. So we strongly urge Beijing to cease its military, diplomatic and economic pressure and coercion directed at Taiwan.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden said he and China's President Xi Jinping have agreed to stick to the Taiwan agreement.
我们看到拜登政府连日来在不同的公开场合上都严正的关切中国的挑衅行径。我国政府将持续强化自我的防卫能力，来坚定维护台湾的自由民主制度，并且持续加强跟美国以及其他理念相近国家的合作跟协调，来共同捍卫以规则为基础的国际秩序，并且共同促进印太地区的和平、稳定跟繁荣。
Talks between the U.S. and China appear to have diffused some of the tension for now. But with high-level international delegations in Taiwan this week, it remains to be seen whether support for Taiwan will bring security or raise the stakes higher. Klein Wang and William Yan for TaiwanPlus.
The tense situation across the Taiwan Strait has made headlines and sparked discussion around the world. But as Rick Glauert reports, on the streets of Taiwan, people are taking the talk of invasion in stride.
2025. That's the year China will be ready to launch a full-scale invasion of Taiwan, according to the country's defense minister, Cho Guozheng. Cho told the legislature of an unprecedented military threat to Taiwan after a record number of incursions by Chinese planes. But people in Taiwan have been living with the threat of annexation by China for decades. And what seems to be escalating tensions has not rattled people in the capital, Taipei.
在这个时间点要真的要所谓的打仗，好像有点不切实际。
我觉得台湾人在这一个状态底下，可能不需要害怕耶。
In fact, by ratcheting up flights around the island, China might be facing diminishing returns.
Chinese obviously also have to consider once it's reached kind of this critical peak of its deployment, which in some ways I think we are looking at that peak, right? How much more can the Chinese continue to carry on these actions without losing that kind of diminished returns, where the Taiwanese public, and traditional international friends and supporters of Taiwan might see China's action as paper tiger. The Chinese are just basically doing this, and we no longer see this as a real threat.
For many in Taiwan, invasion by China does not feel like an imminent threat.
对我来说，我比较不会担心，有可能是因为台湾从小到大都是这个样子的，对啊，已经常见，就跟地震常常会发生，可是你不会因为这样天天就害怕，差不多的感觉。
China's escalating saber rattling has sent geopolitical shockwaves around the world, prompting high-level talks between the US and China. But for many people living in Taiwan, there are more important things in life than worrying about the bully next door. Alex Chen and Rick Loward for TaiwanPlus.
Well, as the cross-strait rhetoric heats up, Taiwan is increasingly looking to its international allies for support. A group of French senators held talks with President Tsai on expanding Taiwan's presence in international organizations. James Chater has more details.
President Tsai Ing-wen greets a visiting delegation of senators from France. At the head of the delegation is former French Defense Minister Alain Richard. His visit has sparked attention because he has spoken out publicly in support of Taiwan. In March, he proposed a resolution in the French Senate calling for Taiwan's participation in international organizations. And for that, President Tsai on Thursday awarded him for his contributions to Taiwan-France relations. Meanwhile, the Chinese embassy in Paris has warned the 5-day trip will damage France's image, but Richard was undeterred.
Nous avons été d'autant plus décidés à exprimer cette position, qui est partagée par, heureusement, beaucoup de nos amis dans le monde, du fait de la contribution essentielle de Taïwan à des champs importants du progrès humain.
The meeting is in stark contrast with an EU summit in Slovenia which ended on Wednesday. That meeting was billed as a chance for the EU to find a unified approach to China. But little progress was made on defining the EU's international strategy. Baltic states have struck out alone in recent months, developing warmer ties with Taiwan. But at the EU summit, China and Taiwan were pushed down the agenda as French fury over the new AUKUS pact and the US-led pullout from Afghanistan became focal points.
Now, the risk is that China is going to be put aside in terms of finding a European position towards China is going to be put aside because it lacks the sense of urgency that exists for other issues.
But in Taiwan, tensions with China are more urgent than ever. Beijing has sent a record number of military planes near Taiwan since it celebrated its National Day on October 1st. Patrick Chen and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
Let's move on to some other news now. Turkey has become the last G20 country to ratify the Paris Climate Agreement after resisting for years because it didn't want to be treated as a developed country. Its parliament unanimously ratified the agreement on cutting emissions linked to global warming. Ankara signed the deal 5 years ago, but hadn't put it into effect because it wanted to be reclassified as a developing country. So its emissions targets would be lower. Parliament signed off on Wednesday following wildfires, floods and drought in the country. Many are blaming the disasters on climate change. The World Health Organization has given its backing to the first ever malaria vaccine. British pharmaceutical company GSK has been developing Mosquirix for more than 30 years. Malaria carried by mosquitoes claims the lives of hundreds of thousands of people every year. The WHO gave its endorsement following a decade of clinical trials in 7 African countries. The study found the vaccine led to a 70% reduction in hospitalizations and deaths when used together with anti-malarial drugs. The head of the WHO hailed the breakthrough as a historic day. In Taiwan, there's been another case of COVID-19 among airline staff. A China Airlines pilot was confirmed with the Delta variant of the virus. It is the first recorded example of breakthrough infection following 2 shots of the Moderna vaccine in Taiwan. Sandy Chi has more.
A China Airlines pilot tested positive for the Delta variant of COVID-19 after leaving quarantine. Her 2 daughters who live with her have both tested negative. The girls attend 2 different elementary schools in Taipei. Classes have been suspended as a precaution and are now set to resume on October 12th.
视同 data 来处理，所以先做预防性的停课，那刚好也是国庆连假，所以我们在下个礼拜2才会恢复正常。
Meanwhile, a total of 1.6 million to 1.8 million doses of BioNTech vaccine are set to arrive over the next 2 days. Foxconn founder Terry Gou made the announcement on Facebook. The delivery is part of 15 million doses ordered by his company's charitable foundation, as well as TSMC and the Tsai Foundation. To date, nearly 58% of Taiwan's population has received 1 shot of COVID-19 vaccine, but only around 14% is fully vaccinated. Asnaya Zhou and Sandy Chi for TaiwanPlus.
Labour rights and gender equality activists gathered outside Taiwan's legislature on Thursday. They're pushing lawmakers to do more to support working families. The legislature is discussing amendments to laws on gender equality employment, but activists say those amendments don't go far enough. They're demanding better paid leave for mothers and fathers of young children. Kata Zhou from the Awakening Foundation told TaiwanPlus the country needs laws that reflect the reality of modern-day life.
In Taiwan, especially, both parents are having a full-time job is a very common situation. Compared to, for example, 20 or 30 years ago, is only 1 people earning the whole bread for the whole family. Right now is a good time for us to really review the whole regulation and how we can really change, amend it, and make sure it really fits the needs of the people.
Coming up, a further tightening of security in Hong Kong and a plan for a mega courtroom. We'll tell you more after the break.
Taiwan 最有人情味的地方。
对。
Welcome back to TaiwanPlus News. Hong Kong's top official has given the last policy address of her current term in office, with a focus on strengthening national security. Chief Executive Carrie Lam pledged major land reforms and the expansion of legal tools for trying cases related to pro-democracy protests in 2019. She said the government will introduce more legislation to complement the wide-ranging national security law imposed by Beijing last year. It will also build a mega courtroom to clear a backlog of thousands of defendants awaiting trial. TaiwanPlus reporter Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick spoke to legal expert Eric Lai. He asked why Hong Kong needs more security legislation with the national security law in place.
China has given imperatives to Carrie Lam and to the Hong Kong government that they must complete the so-called constitutional responsibility to complete the domestic legislation on national security law under Article 23 of the Basic Law. Although we have seen the new national security law imposed by Beijing has been widely used to repress and arrest activists and civil society organizations and union members. From the eyes of the government, there are still many rooms for them to maximize the capacity of the local laws to criminalize all kinds of activities, including local groups' connections with overseas groups. And therefore, they may see that a legislation on the national security under Article 23 of the Basic Law becomes necessary. But more importantly, it is also a sign that the governments of Hong Kong and China want to expand the national security regime to everywhere in society. And more use of the old laws and new laws together can help the government to wipe up all the potential voices and forces of opposition in Hong Kong now.
Carrie Lam has also pledged to build a mega courtroom that can accommodate trials with huge numbers of defendants, like the 47 pro-democracy candidates that are standing trial for sedition, for standing for primary elections. So is this a solution?
Building a mega court could not solve the problem at all, because the real issue is there have been a mass arrests and arbitrary prosecutions against peaceful protesters and civilians during the 2019 protests. And after the imposition of the national security law a year after, these mass arrests, arbitrary arrests, and prosecution become much more common in Hong Kong. We have more than 10,000 citizens being arrested, and only a quarter of them are being charged. We can see the trend of the mass prosecution, mass arrests, and arbitrary detentions happening in Hong Kong. Many of them are suffering from pretrial detention. And because of the government's intimidation to the civil society's crowdfunding for supporting protesters in the court, and the limitations of the legal aid systems in Hong Kong is a much bigger issue if the government truly wants to uphold access to justice and the rule of law. And therefore, building a mega court is just a sidetrack of the real issue that these protesters should not be prosecuted at the very beginning.
It's not just in Hong Kong that freedoms are being suppressed. Within China's borders, the government has been using a covert system of detention and torture under the euphemism residential surveillance at designated locations, or RSDL. I spoke with Peter Darlin, who was himself detained in 2016. He's the director of the NGO Safeguard Defenders. They've released a graphic report on the topic titled Locked Up.
RSDL is a euphemism, residential surveillance at a designated location, which in reality means that the police or the Ministry of State Security has the right to detain you at a secret location for up to half a year.
What are the kinds of people who are detained at these RSDLs?
RSDL, initially at least, was primarily used to target human rights defenders, journalists, lawyers, and the occasional foreigner where there was a political motivation behind taking them. Unfortunately, recently, since 2018 or so, we've started seeing local police utilizing RSDL on a much wider scale, which is one of the reasons why the use of RSDL has increased so significantly over the last few years.
How many of these sort of designated locations do you estimate that there are now?
It's very difficult to say, because RSDL can take place in sort of makeshift rooms in police-run guest houses, etc. but it also takes place in custom-built secret prisons. So they have two different types of facility, depending on really the resources of the unit that places you into RSDL. So the Ministry of State Security, which takes in people like, myself, the two Michaels, and other high-profile targets, tend to have custom-built secret prisons, while local police will use makeshift converted rooms in guest houses or other government-run facilities.
And what was your own personal experience of RSDL?
Luckily, unlike, say, the two Michaels or the two Canadians, two Australians, I only spent about a month inside RSDL. I was taken late at night in Beijing and placed into this facility together with my girlfriend and several colleagues, and got to experience sort of the full barrage of techniques that they use in getting what they want, from prolonged nightly 6-hour-long interrogations to intimidation, mental health torture, lie detector tests, and a few other experiences. But unlike most victims that we speak to, and we've spoken to about 200 of them, as a foreigner, as a Westerner, I was spared physical torture. So my case is quite unusual and not very representative.
And what was your crime? Why were you detained in the first place?
Well, I was never actually charged with a crime. What makes RSDL so interesting for police and Ministry of State Security is that this takes place before you're arrested. So they don't really need to charge you with a crime. No court order is required, etc. But I was accused vaguely of endangering national security, much like your Taiwanese compatriot Lee.
The United States Senate is nearing an agreement to raise the national debt ceiling, narrowly avoiding a federal default. Senate Democrats say they are willing to accept an offer from Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to temporarily lift the debt limit. This staves off the threat of a national crisis, but only until December. Amongst other things, a default could have halted payments to government contractors, affecting the healthcare system and pensions. Amazon-owned streaming service Twitch has been hit by a massive data breach in what's being described as one of the biggest leaks in internet history. Hackers have so far revealed an estimated 125 gigabytes of data, including internal source code and confidential earnings information for the platform's largest streamers. There are concerns that the attack could be just the start of something bigger, with an anonymous user on popular online forum 4chan saying the leak is just part one. Another user, Jeff Bezos, paid $970 million for this. We're giving it away for free. In Taiwan, children are much less likely to receive organ donations than adults. But in a rare procedure, 2 girls received kidneys from a year-old boy, giving them a new life, free of dialysis and pain. Louise Watt has this touching story.
The smile of this 5-year-old girl can't be hidden even behind her mask. When she was just 4 days old, she started having dialysis 3 times a week for a kidney problem. Now she has received a new kidney and a new life, thanks to a donation from a 1-year-old boy.
一个生命的开始，也是一个生命的结束。那我们很感谢愿意把肾脏捐出来的这位小天使。
The boy's other kidney went to a 9-year-old girl who had spent 3 years on dialysis. The procedures marked the first time in Taiwan that 2 kidneys from 1 donor were transplanted into different people.
大家在吃午饭的时候，我要回去洗肾，所以因为阿嬷有时候都会很晚来，所以我只能看着大家吃。
The donated kidneys were only about the size of an adult thumb, less than 6 centimeters, and transplanting them was difficult and risky. Children also have finer blood vessels, making post-transplant care difficult.
这个血管的吻合上必须要吻合在大动脉，还有这个下腔静脉。即便立即的手术做成了，但是它可能在过了1-2天之后，它可能就因为血管栓塞，那这一颗肾脏可能就报销掉了。上学，那可以去。
In Taiwan, children are much less likely to receive organ donations than adults. Organs from living adult donors are generally not suitable for children, and there are few child donors. But this is one of the rare happy outcomes for staff, 2 families, and the 2 girls who get to live their lives as children again. Patrick Chen and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus. We'll leave you with some images of this street dog Boji, who enjoys travelling on ferries, buses and metro trains in Istanbul. Stay safe and see you next time.